All right, let's do this. All right, and you guys can see that okay?
Yes.
Awesome, thank you so much. Hello, everyone. My name is Hannah Speechley. I'm in sociology, and my capstone is UC Riverside redlined? We're going to be looking at inequality and the decline of California state investment in the University of California system. So there's a lot of moving parts in this. So I conducted a mixed methods research study, which is rooted in Pierre Bourdieu's theory of habitus, which is basically like wealth begets wealth and greatness begets greatness. So that's cultural and social reproduction across generations, which includes prestige in institutional theory. So my project was inspired by the Stop Redlining UCR movement on campus in fall 2021, which called attention to the funding inequalities that are present in the UC system. This letter was penned after CHAS faced an 11% employment deficit. Those people were cut, which meant there was a lot of consolidation of roles, reduction in force, and that also meant faculty weren't able to support students that they needed. And this is really problematic because of the types of students we serve at UCR. That's a lot of first-gen students, that's a lot of non-white students, it's a lot of non-traditional and transfer students. So this is really, really important to not only faculty, but for staff as well. Where is this lack of funding coming from? That's what I really wanted to investigate. So 3 primary research questions that I have, each align with each method that I decided to use. So the first is, how do faculty understandings of the budget align with UC Office of the President policies? I'm going to refer to that as UCOP. So that I did purposefully sampled interviews with around 10 faculty, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but those are divided into 2 groups that I found really interesting. The second is, how have changes to the California state budget shifted the revenue patterns at each UC campus? So this is kind of a historical one. I'm going to be talking about historical factors and moving from the past to the present. And the third, this one's kind of up for discussion using both of those research questions, is what are the consequences of each campus having to generate its own revenue? So first, before I get into the meat and potatoes, I'm going to be talking about the UC rebenching financial policy. So this is a financial policy that was introduced in the 2016-17 academic year, which replaced previous funding formulas that did not benefit all campuses in the system equally. So all the UC campuses, except for UC Merced and UC San Francisco, are under this financial policy. The idea was that some campuses were benefiting from state dollars more than others, and that's obviously not equitable. So they introduced this policy in an effort to kind of bring everyone up to the same level, but this only applies to state dollars. This is for state funding. It has nothing to do with tuition. If you think about it in 2 different ways, you have state funding, and then you also have tuition. Those are the 2 main sources of revenue. So UC Merced isn't under this policy because it requires more state assistance than what the other campuses would usually get, mostly because it's so new and because it still needs a little bit more development. UC San Francisco is also mostly medical graduate students, so those wouldn't be really affected by the rebenching policy anyway. As of right now, or as of 2019-2020, when this report was published in 2021 by Regents, each campus receives around $8,000 per undergraduate student. But those undergraduate students are only California residents, and this gets a little bit tricky. As you can see here, they go by, sorry, I don't know why I can't talk today. This goes by weighting factors. So undergraduate is California resident. Those are at 1.0. So that's around $8,000. Academic doctoral students are funded at 2.5. Health sciences students are at 5 times. So you can see here, undergraduates 8,000, and academic doctoral students, so like a PhD in education, a PhD in chemical engineering, those are going to be funded at $20,000. A health sciences student would be funded at $40,000. And the argument for this is that because you need more equipment, you need more funding, like whatever, they're going to cost more to educate those students as opposed to an undergraduate student. Now, because there are non-resident undergraduate students, they're not funded by the state at all. So this is a push by the California state government to incentivize funding for California residents. But this is where it gets a little bit tricky, right? So you can see here, Riverside is like the blue diamond in the middle. So it was kind of in the middle. But Santa Barbara and Irvine were at the bottom. So clearly these last financial policies that they had for state subsidies were not working. So UC looked at this and said, okay, so we need to make this more equitable. How can we fund every student equally? And they're all equal by around 2018-19, 2019-20. Obviously 2020, 2021, by the time this report came out, that was projected. So redlining highlighted the paradox of our campus ranking the highest in social mobility, but we still receive less funding per student than other UC campuses. If rebenching is supposed to bring us all to equity, it's really not doing a very good job. So budget cuts following COVID-19 exacerbated this difference. So the letter by the same name, pointed out that when you take into account state subsidies and also private donations and the way endowments and everything are spread out, UCR gets around 8,500 per student, which is about equal to what you would get from rebenching. UCLA ends up getting 11,500 per student. Berkeley, Davis, Irvine, and San Diego end up getting about 10,000 per student. So where does the inequality come from? And here's a quote from the rebenching letter that I thought was really salient, but they liken this to redlining. They say this is dangerously reminiscent of redlining. It's not appropriate that we have such a diverse student body, some of the highest recipients of Pell Grants. And this policy that's supposed to be equitable with state funding isn't doing enough. It is time to stop redlining UCR. We need equal investment, not just from the state, but from UCOP itself. So how do we get here? If UC can't fully equalize these funds, where are we? So this can actually be traced back to a significant decline in state investment since the passage of Proposition 13, which placed a limit on taxation for property. So that's like 2%. The average, I took an average from 1980 to 1990 academic years and from 2011 to 2021. I compared the average of both of those and adjusted for inflation. I found a p-value of less than 0.001. So there's a very significant decline. California used to provide up to 40% of the UC budget. Now it's below 10%. As a result, UC has to become more entrepreneurial or business-like in making up those losses that would have been covered by state funding. So they do that through two means. The first is internal. So that's like reduction in force, consolidation of faculty and staff roles. My advisor, just as an anecdote, in sociology, our advisors are not just for sociology, they're also for anthropology. So they have two groups of students, whereas normally they'd only be working in sociology. Now they're working in sociology and anthropology. So that's an example of reduction in force. Another one is reducing class offerings and impacting of majors. Then you don't have to pay lecturers or adjunct faculty or even full-time faculty for teaching more classes if you don't offer those classes in the first place. Another is tuition hikes. They have to get the money from somewhere, and if it's not coming from the state, it's going to be coming from the students. So the most famous one is in 2009, where tuition went up from $8,000 to $10,000. People were not happy about that, but Regents said, well, the money's not coming from the government. We just had a recession. It's going to come from you guys. And that makes it difficult for low-income students to be able to afford a university tuition. So it affects not just the faculty, but also the students who want to come to our university. And the external is diversification of revenue. So that could be endowments. You're looking at alumni donations, third-party donations, contracts with third parties for research like UC Berkeley. They have the Lawrence Lab, so they get a lot of government funding for that, and then reliance on grants for research. Now, each campus's ability to generate revenue is largely dependent on the prestige of that particular campus. Location is a huge one. If you think about the location of each campus, would you rather be close to Silicon Valley, a business hub, close to government, or would you rather be near a warehouse in the middle of nowhere and an hour away from LA with traffic? Kind of a no-brainer for a lot of students. The second is endowments and also the rebenching policy. This is where the rebenching policy gets a little tricky. Because some campuses attract more out-of-state and international students because of that prestige, the way tuition works is that out-of-state enrollment and tuition actually gets to be kept by that campus. There's a very marginal amount redistributed across the campuses, but when you consider that out-of-state students pay $46,000 in tuition and the university gets to keep that, they're going to get more money by enrolling international and out-of-state students. Whereas UC Riverside, that primarily serves in-state students, they're missing out on a lot of that revenue. And it's not like they haven't tried. It's just really hard for UC Riverside to attract that same student base. So here, UC Irvine serves 19% out-of-state and international students. UC Riverside only has 3%. UC Irvine is actually the reason that the UC Office of the President had to put a cap on how many international and out-of-state students they could have. And graduate students is a big one. UC Riverside enrolls fewer doctoral and health sciences students overall, which is another point where the rebenching policy kind of doesn't work. It seems equitable until you realize it's really not, because graduate programs often have more prestige than the undergraduate programs. Take, for example, UC Berkeley's Haas School of Business. Big name, tons of world-class faculty there. Everyone wants to go there. I even applied to UC Berkeley for its graduate program, right? but an MBA from UC Berkeley's Haas School of Business and an MBA from UC Riverside's Gary Anderson School of Management, it's the same degree. It's the same MBA. It's the same UC. One has more prestige than the other, and it's because of name and ranking. One thing that I thought was interesting, this is courtesy of the Daily Bruin, is if you want to break down demographics by campus. So UCLA and UC Berkeley serve a lot more Asian students, whereas UC Merced and UC Riverside serve a larger amount of Hispanic students. And then if you look at STEM versus non-STEM students, especially if you're looking at prestige in STEM and humanities, and also California, non-California resident, you'll see UCLA and UC Berkeley have more non-California residents than Merced and Riverside. So even just looking at non-California residents, that includes out-of-state and international students, UCLA and UC Berkeley will be able to keep more of that tuition from out-of-state and international students, with less of that being distributed. UC Riverside compared to its peers, this is endowment that I was talking about earlier. So I looked at total private supports, that's third parties, usually in the form of alumni donations, investments. So this is combined. So this is Regents and campus foundations. Topping the list is UC Los Angeles with nearly $800 million. UC Riverside bottoms the list at $28 million. There's not a lot you can really get with $28 million. Someone at UCLA is probably writing a check for $28 million. So it's not just the investment, but it's also how many people can we recruit to our campus. But it's all of these. It's all of prestige. It's about the endowments. It's about, this is how we got to where we are today. And it's frustrating because faculty have talked about the same thing. So when I interviewed faculty and asking them, like, how did we get here? Is there anything we can do to fix this? Because the university is valuing its endowments and its diversification of revenue over the state, which should be supporting UC as a public institution. We want to be supporting California residents, our people in the Inland Empire. We don't have the resources to do so when we're competing with UCLA, $762 million. How are we supposed to support our students? So I purposefully sampled 10 faculty, and each one kind of fell into one of two groups. The first one is symbolic, which in sociology means that people who have a symbolic perspective are more likely to attribute a theory or a cause to things they see around them in their everyday lives. So there were a lot of faculty who would recall stories about their students not being able to get an advising appointment because of the reduction in force, or maybe they didn't have equitable access to internet at home because of the COVID-19 pandemic, or they had to share their mom's car and they weren't able to get to school on time. Things like that. Or maybe they'd even look at Sproul and say, well, Sproul's falling apart. We don't have the money to fix it. Is the university going to make sure that we have yeah, you're laughing. It's funny, but it's true. I mean, there are labs that have had to be put on hold because of ceilings in the walls in the College of Engineering. This happens all around campus. Where are we going to get the money for this? People in this group are more likely to agree with the redlining metaphor because they feel as though it highlights the problems that we are facing at our campus. The structural group viewed inequality as influenced by institutional and economic factors. So they're less likely to place importance on what they see in their everyday lives, but they're more likely to look at it as, these are people who have served on administrative and financial committees. They're more likely to see where the money's going and where it's coming from. So they're more likely to say, well, it's because all the money's going to UCLA, all the money's going to UC Berkeley. We're not getting a lot of money here, and that's why it turned out the way it did. They're less likely to agree with the redlining metaphor, not because they feel it's wrong, but because they feel it doesn't adequately capture the reality of the situation, that it's not UC Riverside being targeted, but if you look in the past, it's also campuses like UC Santa Barbara, UC Santa Cruz, that haven't been getting that same kind of support that UC Riverside should also be getting. Now, whether or not they agree or disagree with the redlining metaphor, one thing became especially clear. And that one thing is that both groups agreed, because of the diversity of our student body, because of the needs of our student body, because of the money that we are missing out on because of these policies that were put in place, however many years ago, before a lot of us were even born, that UCR needs more funding to better support our campus's student body. There is no other way of looking around it. You can look at the resources we do or don't have on campus. You can compare the time it takes to commute from campus from places like Fontana and Ontario with all the traffic. You can look at the business opportunities that are here, But if people aren't getting the education that they deserve with world-class faculty that we have because of these policies that are put in place by UCOP to force campuses to generate their own revenue when not every campus is readily equipped to do so because of prestige, because of not being able to attract the people that they want to attract, this is problematic. So they all agree that we need to better support our campus's student body, but in what way? Now, finally, this is all kind of a lot. And again, there are so many moving parts, but this is complicated. There are so many parts of UC that are centralized, but there are so many parts of them that aren't. There were a lot of things I wanted to look at, but I simply couldn't. One thing that a lot of people have been asking me about is, well, what about UC Merced? You know, they agreed with the redlining metaphor and they wanted to push forward as well. So I looked at this in the context of rebenching. And UC Merced is not under the rebenching policy because it needs more state support. But I think what would be interesting is that how can we better support UC Merced? They also support a lot of non-traditional and in-state students, and especially Hispanic and Latino students. They need our support just as much as the ones in our backyard. So that would be one thing I would be interested in seeing for future research. I think in that vein, connections to other campuses that have also been like hard done by in the past because of these financial models that were put in place by UCOP. UC Santa Cruz is a big example. UC Santa Barbara is a big example. UC Berkeley is also in a $340 million deficit because of the pandemic. They're getting a lot of money, but let's not pretend that there aren't these financial inequalities present at a lot of campuses. Those campuses also serve a lot of Pell Grant students. So it's not just us that is being hurt by these policies. It's every campus. But we just might not see it because of the prestige that they have. And another thing is that emphasis on student and faculty experiences within UCR is something I also really wanted to focus on, but I wasn't able to because of limited time and finances. So maybe seeing if something like that could be replicated on another campus would be something I would really like to see. As far as implications for policy and practice, the biggest thing is state funding. The rebenching policy relies on state dollars, which aren't really existent right now. That can't replace what UC Riverside isn't getting because we're not getting non-resident tuition. How are we supposed to get what's not there? Right? The second is Governor Newsom has been putting forward a lot of investment after the pandemic. He did have a cut to UC Riverside's funding, or the UC funding in general, and now he's planning to give it back. But this is still inequitable. UCLA received $470 million in additional state funding, whereas UC Riverside only received $290 million. If I said thousand, sorry, I said million. Yeah, 490 million compared to 290 million. That's not equitable still, especially considering the types of students, the non-traditional students and first-gen students of color who we still need to uphold to the standard. The second one is there's talk of the Inland Empire Rising Fund, which is ongoing taxation. This was proposed by Jose Medina, who is an Inland Empire resident. He sees the struggle that UC Riverside is facing in wake of these policies and says, well, we need more funding for this particular campus. And nobody really disagrees with that, except this is a stopgap fix that does not address the inequalities that are existent in this funding model. But even though UC is not reliant on state dollars, it should be because it's a public university. You can't have public without the public, also known as the government. That's something that it just doesn't really make any sense. It wants to be centralized, but it's not. And if each university and each campus has to be more entrepreneurial or looking towards more private and third-party sources of revenue, sure, it works, but that doesn't address the problem that we need more state dollars. And it needs to be distributed in an equitable manner that doesn't rely on a campus's prestige, a campus's ability to attract out-of-state and international students if that demand isn't really there to begin with, but also relies on the success and so the mobility that each campus wants to promote. If we want to promote research, we want to promote learning, we want to promote the next generation, many of whom are first-generation students, we need to be looking to supporting them the most. These are my preliminary references. Of course, this is just what I used in this presentation. I do have a full works cited list, doesn't fit on here. So my paper will be published through eScholarship through University Honors on May 11th. If you would like to read and see more of the sources that I have, please feel free to do so. Otherwise, I am open for any questions. There's a lot that I probably missed because there are so many moving parts, so I'm more than happy to talk more about this, but thank you again.
All right. Thank you, Hannah. Very, very illuminating. Go ahead and stop your recording, please.
Okay, let's see, how do I?